Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall arriving for this state opening of Parliament of 2022. Prince in his uniform of Admiral of the Fleet, making their way up the royal staircase, as the Prince has done on several occasions when accompanying the Queen, but today representing the Queen along with his son, the Duke of Cambridge. Making their way up the stairs, the heralds. And among them, Professor Anne Curry. Now, this is a development, a female herald. We've not seen that at Westminster before. Heralds being led by the Garter King of Arms, Peter Vine White. Dominic Raab, the Minister of Justice, and of course the Lord Chancellor, responsible for keeping the Queen's speech safe in the Lord Chancellor's purse, which he's clutching rather firmly there, ready to give the speech to the Prince of Wales to be reading in a short while. As the procession forms up in the Royal Gallery, and they'll wait for the Marquis of Cholmondeley to signal that the procession can get underway. So we'll keep a close eye, obviously, on what's going on, and as soon as the procession starts, we'll be back in the Royal Gallery immediately. Chris, where is this debate on cost of living? The heralds, of course, will be they're now facing the chamber itself, and they'll be making their way along with the royal party. Party will include senior members of the armed forces, senior officials from the royal household, Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cambridge, Duchess of Cornwall, and the Duke of Cambridge, having had the special permission from the Queen to represent her at this state opening, given the fact that Her Majesty is not able to attend because of what the palace described last night as episodic mobility problems. Queen, of course, has had to cancel quite a few appearances in public in the last few months. But in fairness, as my mother keeps on reminding me, Her Majesty is 96, you know, and these things are to be expected, which I think is a good dose of common sense. It's interesting, Chris, when we talk about
hats off, strangers!
Sergeant-at-Arms and the Speaker's chaplain in the procession, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, who's known for his cheerful manner and his way of trying to cajole MPs into doing as he wants them to do and to curb their enthusiasm sometimes. And into the members' lobby of the House of Commons. So into the chamber of the House of Commons, which in a short while will be closed very firmly when Black Rod approaches, just to demonstrate the independence of the House of Commons from the monarch. Plenty of smiles and a bit of laughter. And look at the contrast, silence in the Royal Gallery as the yeomen of the guard and the heralds wait to start the procession once the royal party emerges from the robing room. and that sense of expectation, of course, the chamber. But today, the pair of thrones no longer there. The sovereign's throne has been taken out for today's event, and what is known as the consort's throne, slightly lower in terms of its height, is there for the Prince of Wales. So we're waiting for the state trumpeters. Lord Chancellor Dominic Raab, waiting with the speech. And all the diplomats and all the guests, some of whom have been here before, some of whom are here for the first time, getting a taste of the colour and the pageantry of the state opening of Parliament. There's nothing quite like it. So the state trumpeters, a signal of the fact that we are in a royal section of the palace, and all of the ceremonial that we'll see shortly is there to demonstrate the fact that while the sovereign can go wherever he or she wishes in this part of the palace, to enter the chamber of the Commons is not something that's allowed. It's not something that's welcomed. So when the monarch's representative, Blackrod in this instance, is sent to summon members of Parliament, Blackrod will find that the door of the House of Commons is closed. That's the statement of the independence of the chamber. And then they will come of their own free will to listen to the content of the speech, led by the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. And won't it be interesting in a short while to see the body language between the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and Sir Keir Starmer for Labour, given the events of recent days. So the royal procession, this state opening of 2022, gets underway, led by the Marquess of Cholmondeley and the Duke of Norfolk. There we have the imperial state crown leading the way, a sign of the authority of the day's proceedings. And representing Her Majesty the Queen, we have the Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cornwall and the Duke of Cambridge, following the crown on its way into the chamber of the House of Lords. Slow progress, deliberate progress towards the Prince's chamber. This little anteroom, dominated by Tudor portraits and by a huge marble statue of Queen Victoria. And it leads directly into the chamber of the House of Lords. And they enter the chamber. To the left-hand side of the thrones, as we look into the chamber from that point, they all stand. Prince of Wales will take his place on the throne that's been set for him. The crown will be placed on that table. And we'll await the signal for members of Parliament to be summoned to the House of Lords.
My Lords, pray be seated.
Signal's been given and acknowledged by Blackrod. The announcement that Blackrod is on her way into the members' lobby and to the door of the Commons.
Close the door! It's Blackrod. Open the door.
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this Honourable House to attend her Councillors of State immediately in the House of Peers.
So a little change in the wording, as you'd expect, because they're not going to attend the Queen, but the Queen's councillors. Sergeant-at-Arms leading the way, and there we saw Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer. We'll get a better look now as they process through the members' lobby and then along the corridor through the central lobby down towards the House of Lords. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, chatting to Blackrod. And the Speaker's chaplain.
No, thank you.
And don't seem to be talking too much. Chris, did you see that?
It's an exhibition, really replete, isn't it, for body language experts.
Oh, they are now. And smiles. Well, that's a little more jolly than I'd have expected, Chris, really.
It's yeah, it really is an occasion, isn't it, for the body language experts and the lip readers, because most of the words we don't quite catch. And a good old chance for small talk. Can you sustain a conversation that isn't primarily about politics for the duration of the walk?
So here we have really hundreds of members of Parliament, in contrast to last year's, which had fewer people here, which was really reduced in numbers, but we're back to full strength, more or less, this year in terms of members of Parliament anyway. And in they come to the House of Lords, and they'll crowd in there. Prime Minister, of course, and Labour leader, the SNP leader, Ian Blackford, is there, and members of the Cabinet, senior members on Labour's front bench. And they'll all squeeze in. And once things have settled down, Prince of Wales will be presented with the speech, which has been written by the government and outlines the programme for the year ahead.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, Her Majesty's government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families. Her Majesty's government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work. Her Majesty's ministers will continue to support the police to make the streets safer and fund the National Health Service to reduce the COVID backlogs. In these challenging times, Her Majesty's government will play a leading role in defending democracy and freedom across the world, including continuing to support the people of Ukraine. Her Majesty's government will drive economic growth to improve living standards and fund sustainable investment in public services. This will be underpinned by a responsible approach to the public finances, reducing debt while reforming and cutting taxes. Her Majesty's ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to its target. A bill will be brought forward to drive local growth, empowering local leaders to regenerate their areas and ensuring everyone can share in the United Kingdom's success. The planning system will be reformed to give residents more involvement in local development. Her Majesty's government will improve transport across the United Kingdom, delivering safer, cleaner services and enabling more innovations. Legislation will be introduced to modernise rail services and improve reliability for passengers. Her Majesty's ministers will bring forward an energy bill to deliver the transition to cheaper, cleaner and more secure energy. This will build on the success of the COP26 summit in Glasgow last year. Draft legislation to promote competition, strengthen consumer rights, and protect households and businesses will be published. Measures will also be published to create new competition rules for digital markets and the largest digital firms. Her Majesty's government will establish the UK Infrastructure Bank in legislation, with objectives to support economic growth and the delivery of net zero. Reforms to education will help every child fulfil their potential wherever they live, raising standards and improving the quality of schools and higher education. Her Majesty's ministers will publish draft legislation to reform the Mental Health Act. Her Majesty's government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth. Regulations on businesses will be repealed and reformed. A bill will enable law inherited from the European Union to be more easily amended. Public sector procurement will be simplified to provide new opportunities for small businesses. New legislation will strengthen the United Kingdom's financial services industry, ensuring that it continues to act in the interest of all people and communities. The United Kingdom's data protection regime will be reformed. Her Majesty's government will continue to champion international trade, delivering jobs across the country and growing the economy. Legislation will be introduced to enable the implementation of the United Kingdom's first new free trade agreements since leaving the European Union. Her Majesty's ministers will encourage agricultural and scientific innovation at home. Legislation will unlock the potential of new technologies to promote sustainable and efficient farming and food production. Her Majesty's government will protect the integrity of the United Kingdom's borders and ensure the safety of its people. Her Majesty's ministers will take action to prevent dangerous and illegal channel crossings and tackle the criminal gangs who profit from facilitating them. Legislation will be introduced to ensure the police have the powers to make the streets safer. To further strengthen powers to tackle illicit finance, reduce economic crime, and help businesses grow. Measures will be introduced to support the security services and help them protect the United Kingdom. Her Majesty's government will lead the way in championing security around the world. It will continue to invest in Her Majesty's gallant armed forces. Her Majesty's ministers will work closely with international partners to maintain a united NATO and address the most pressing global security challenges. The continued success and integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom is of paramount importance to Her Majesty's government, including the internal economic bonds between all of its parts. Her Majesty's government will prioritise support for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and its institutions, including through legislation to address the legacy of the past. Her Majesty's government will ensure the Constitution is defended. Her Majesty's ministers will restore the balance of power between the legislature and the courts by introducing a Bill of Rights. Legislation will prevent public bodies engaging in boycotts that undermine community cohesion. Her Majesty's government will introduce legislation to improve the regulation of social housing, to strengthen the rights of tenants and ensure better quality, safer homes. Legislation will also be introduced to ban conversion therapy. Proposals will be published to establish an independent regulator of English football. In this year of the Platinum Jubilee, Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth, and to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham this summer. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. Her Majesty prays that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
So the Prince of Wales has returned the speech to the Lord Chancellor, the Secretary of State for Justice, Dominic Raab. And the procession will gather once again to return through the Royal Gallery and then via the Sovereign's entrance, where the Royal Party will leave the Palace of Westminster. The Prince of Wales, followed by the Duchess of Cornwall and the Duke of Cambridge, who sat either side of the throne in those state chairs, listening carefully to the content of the speech. And joining the greater procession, including the heralds, on their way through the Royal Gallery and down to the Norman porch, which is just on the right-hand side as they process. So we'd been told to expect, and Chris was telling us earlier, some 38 bills detailed in that Queen's speech, which was delivered by the Prince of Wales on behalf of the Queen. And of course, that will be the subject of the Commons debate, the debate in the Commons and indeed in the House of Lords later. A traditional debate in the Commons, which will involve the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition as the new session of Parliament gets underway. So it's not just a ceremonial event here, it's very much a political event. And the Members of Parliament, Damien Green there, Marc-Francois, making their way back through the lobby down to the House of Commons. Ready, Hilary Benn ready for the debate to get underway. Chris Grayling. And as we see the MPs going back, we'll start with Chris and we'll just stay on these images if we can. I'm just wondering, Chris, what there for you was unexpected? Was there anything there which you thought, oh, hang on a bit, we weren't quite sure about that?
I think broadly speaking it was as expected. I think those opening sentences that we heard from the Prince of Wales articulating the government's programme got to the heart of the conversation we'd had beforehand, with that emphasis on the cost of living mentioned in the first sentence there, and levelling up, the government project for addressing regional inequalities and the NHS, and then that point that Simon was reflecting on before about what the government sees as sustainable investment in the public finances, responsible approach, to use the government's words, to the public finances. Then that emphasis as well on making the most, as the government sees it, of Brexit, the flexibilities afforded by leaving the European Union, if you like, completing the rewiring job, really, which Brexit is a huge project of doing. One thing that struck me here is it's a very striking piece of delicate language. There's been a lot of focus, hasn't there, over the weekend following the elections in